It is not by coincidence that the only denomination currently calling for a sacred conversation on race in the midst of the rise again of racism in our country is the United Church of Christ. Still hearing God's voice calling to it and saying that a home built without freedom for everybody is a home that has freedom for nobody. 1972 was the year that our first child was born. I was in my second year of ordained ministry and was pretty well occupied trying to figure out how to keep from doing so many things wrong as a parent and as a pastor. So I did not notice at the time that the Bay Area Association of the Northern California Conference of the United Church of Christ ordained an openly gay man. Now, even in Northern California in 1972, that was a step out of the comfort zone. The churches in the Bay Area could have stayed comfortable in Babylon, not moving into this new territory, but much as in the story of the Amistad, local congregations heard God calling them to the reality that a home that excluded anybody was not a home that included God. The church could have held on to its level of comfort in the culture and resisted or rejected the inclusion of GLBT folks among the ordained clergy. But first a few in the Bay Area, and then the General Synod of the United Church of Christ, and since then hundreds of UCC churches around the country have embraced this still speaking God's call to be inclusive and welcoming communities of faith. And have done so with joyful solidarity with those who have otherwise been dispossessed and displaced from the household of God, unjustly and unfairly. The United Church of Christ does these things not because it seeks to be first in anything. It does these things not because the culture would ask it to. It does these things because God expects it to. Because it continues to attend to God's still speaking voice. This value of holding fast to a continuing testament is one of the core values of our tradition. It is what this comma is all about. I was preaching last weekend at Plymouth Church in Coconut Grove in Florida, Miami, Florida. Somebody saw this and said, "Oh, what's the hook for?" And I said, "It's the UCC hook." Because it reminds us of John Robinson's quote in his speech to the Pilgrims, "God has yet more light and truth to break forth from God's holy word." God is still speaking. Don't put a period where God has placed a comma. But this value of holding fast to a continuing testament is not all we have to offer to the formation of individuals, discipleship, forming communities, or the world at large. Isaiah's experience of an Israel in exile was that she quickly became comfortable with the status quo. The grand vision of God's promise to Israel was soon relegated to God's presence in Babylon. So Isaiah needed to shake Israel free of its comfort so that she could continue to be responsive to God's call of promise and hope. The exile was not home. Babylon was not home. And in truth, as Barbara Brown Taylor says in a marvelous sermon of this title, none of us is home yet. Our call for faith communities to be communities of inclusive and radical welcome are calls for the church to increasingly embody the vision of home outlined in the biblical text. It is a home not defined by exclusion. The vision of Isaiah for a place where the basic sustenance in life is abundant and free is more than a call for just sharing of the earth and the earth's resources. It is a reminder that life's meaning is found in the presence of relationships. Relationship with God and relationship with God's creation. I was struck by Glenn Beck's speech at the recent Convention of Conservatives in Washington, D.C. He called for an eradication of the word community in our political life. Equating the idea of community and the pursuit of the common good with an antithesis of American capitalistic ideals. I am struck by the fact that the very cadre of people that reject Darwin's idea of biological evolution embrace so fully the clearly false concept of Darwinian sociology and economics.
Let that one sink in.
I believe injustice is to be found everywhere God's intent for creation is thwarted or rejected in human life and human experience. The denigrating of community is at its heart the root of all injustice. There is a principle that permeates the scriptures which can be summarized simply by saying what happens to one of God's children happens to every one of God's children. Our claim of radical welcome is the positive side of that principle. Every person merits inclusion at the free and bountiful table of God's love, justice, and peace. Clearly, in our world, to proclaim that message is to put ourselves in an uncomfortable place. But we don't want to live in the Babylon of the xenophobic, racist world that is expressed in the angry faces of so many of our fellow citizens. God is clearly calling us with a new and sharper word. This is not home yet. This is not an especially easy calling, which is one reason it's helpful and healthy to be bound together with others here and across the country and around the world who share it. But I want to caution us against overemphasizing the difficulty of our task, the complexity of our mission. Because when we overemphasize it, we are more and more tempted to just get comfortable in Babylon. The vision that Isaiah lays out in the 55th chapter is not one of suffering or of sacrifice. It is one of unlimited sharing and unending sustenance. The anger that is so prevalent in our world today, and particularly in our culture, comes, ironically, from the failure of the culture's definition of meaning, which those who are angry seek to embrace more fully, as if doing it harder would make it work. When the economy recovers, some of the anger will dissipate, but meaning will still not be achieved. All that will happen is many will decide to stay in Babylon.